Well, hello, folks. Welcome back. Chris here once again in Daba, Africa, with an update on events in Africa. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about a couple of articles that came out yesterday and reference an article that I wrote in January of last year talking about U.S. foreign policy towards Africa. It's a timely topic as we're facing the Wuhan coronavirus COVID-19 situation at the moment. And this is perhaps an opportunity to take a closer look at U.S. policy towards Africa. So we have two op-eds that came out yesterday, both focused on that specific topic. And so I'd like to address those. But before I get in that, first let me once again send out my profound thank you to the additional subscribers who've joined my channel in the past couple of days. It's been very rewarding to see people sign up. Of course, it's never fun when people leave, but the folks who've been signing up have been checking out content, so I thank you for that. That makes it worthwhile. As you know, this is a personal effort. It's not a paid position, certainly not at the moment. And the idea is to share ideas and talk about Africa so people are better informed on the continent, particularly here in the United States. But also for abroad, I want folks abroad to have a better understanding for where the United States is and how the U.S. engages and has engaged Africa. So the three articles I'm going to talk about is one called A Wake-Up Call for U.S. Policy Toward Africa by John Rosenberg. He's an analyst that works in Arlington, Virginia. John has written an article here talking about a wake-up call and how the U.S. needs to get its act together on Africa. The other is by Judd Devermont, who is from the Center for CSIS, the Center for Strategic International Studies in D.C., and his op-ed was entitled COVID-19 Pandemic Presents an Opportunity to Refresh U.S. Foreign Policy. So there's a couple of comments in here that I take issue with, and I'll address those. And then the third article here is a closer look at the new U.S. strategy for Africa. A closer look at the new U.S. strategy for Africa. This was a U.S. Army War Room article that I wrote. It was published in January of 2019, talking about, at that time, the recent announcement by former National Security Advisor Ambassador John Bolton, talking about a new strategy for Africa from the Trump administration. All right, so I'm going to get into those, but once again, just as a reminder for folks, I've taken to, since we have no sports, we have nothing we can watch or participate in now. Those of you who follow my videos, you know that I tend to wear rugby jerseys or I wear an African dress when I do these videos in Africa. Since this is U.S. foreign policy on Africa, today I'm wearing my 2019 U.S. road jersey from the Rugby World Cup. And then on the wall behind me is a souvenir scarf from the U.S.-England game that I attended in Kobe last fall in Japan. Anyway, so on to the story here. So John Rosenberg writes a article about U.S. foreign policy, and he talks about that since the end of the Cold War, United States foreign policy towards Africa has been thin from his perspective on several issues, particularly trade, investment, and diplomacy. He also mentions in his article that many African states have been vocal in their interest about lessening their dependence on China, which for most African countries has grown significantly over the past decade. It was a decade, not even quite a decade ago, that the United States was still Africa's largest trading partner, and then China surpassed us and has not looked back. Now, China's level of trade went to well over $200 billion per year with the continent, but has dropped down before COVID-19 to around $200 billion per year, $204 billion in 2019, I believe it was. So the U.S. is no longer Africa's largest trading partner, a position we held for decades. And many countries in Africa have been quite vocal that they don't want to be quite as dependent on China. Now, I know that some people say, well, no, Africans love China. And some African governments and countries do, in fact, love China. And they don't mind that dependence on China. But when commodity prices tank, and China is one of your major purchasers of commodities, it's a time when people start reassessing their relationship. And that's been going on with some African states at this point. Now, in his article, he also mentions a recent report from Oxfam International in which they said that COVID-19, by their estimates, could set back development in Africa by 3 decades. Wow. If this is true, this is a pretty frightening prospect. Now, how could that be? Even if Africans aren't gravely affected by the health impacts of COVID-19 with the loss of life and overburdening healthcare systems, African economies are being devastated as we speak by those who purchase their commodity products and finished products, the few that there are, no longer purchasing those things or buying them in far smaller volumes than they were pre-COVID-19. A key case there is the trade with China. China's dependence on things from Africa has dropped dramatically as their manufacturing has dropped off the charts. Since they're not making things, they're not buying things to make those things. And there you have it. And it's not just that. When people don't have jobs, we have 17 million jobless claims here in the United States just in the past 2.5 weeks, an astounding figure that at this pace will quickly dwarf the Great Depression in terms of actual number of people thrown out of work by this event. Here in the United States and in Europe, where people are losing jobs and the crisis is critical, if you have less money or you see less money coming in, you are less inclined to buy luxuries like iPhones manufactured in China by Apple, or you are less likely to purchase things that you enjoy, the luxuries of life like coffee or cocoa, things like that. And those things, of course, come largely from Africa. So the suppliers lose their markets, at least in the short term. This could be the most devastating impact of COVID-19, the Wuhan coronavirus across Africa, the economic impact. And that's what Oxfam is talking about, setting back the continent 3 decades. That is a frightening prospect, if in fact it's true. Well, John Rosenberg is not saying that there hasn't been any marked change between the previous administration and the current one. In fact, if you look at events, as I predicted before Trump became president, actually I predicted this whether it was going to be Clinton or Trump, I said that U.S. foreign policy towards Africa would change almost not at all. There'd be virtually no change. These things that are in place are largely bipartisan efforts through Congress and actions here and there by presidents that put these policies and programs in place in Africa. So they were unlikely to change. It takes an awful lot to get rid of these programs. And so I said there'd be no major change. John confirms this in his assessment. He says that there has been no real change. But he also notes that this is also despite the 2018 New Africa strategy, the one which I referenced in my article. That strategy really hasn't changed our engagement in Africa, at least not in any demonstrable way that we can identify thus far. Now, a year and a half after it was announced. So there you have it. He also talks about other actors in Africa, and those would include China, of course. He mentions Turkey, as I've done previously, but Brazil to a lesser extent, Russia to an increasing extent in the security field and arms sales, maybe not so much in other fields, but certainly there, and the European Union. So these are other actors in Africa, and the U.S. not withdrawing, but certainly not engaging with African states as well as it should, risk losing out to other competitors in Africa. And that is not a small thing. That is an important consideration, not one that seems to rise to the top of foreign policy circles often enough in Washington, regardless of who the president is. And for those of us who are Africanists, this has been a long-term point of consternation for us and frustration. So let me switch now to Judd Devermont's article. Judd, as I mentioned, is from CSIS, the Center for Strategic and International Studies. He is the director for the Africa program there. And Judd has a few points that he wanted to bring out. He makes a note that Africa is uniquely vulnerable in large measure because of its weak health systems across the continent to COVID-19. I would have to agree with that. He also suggests that the COVID-19 crisis presents a unique once-in-a-generation opportunity for U.S. foreign policy. Now, I can't disagree with him here. And it sounds perhaps a little, I don't know, not callous or maybe cunning. I'm not sure what the word is, but I'm sure that some Africans and other Africanists might look at this and take umbrage with the fact that someone's suggesting that this is an opportunity. Well, it is an opportunity. When crisis comes opportunity, I'm not saying you try to create the opportunity, and I don't think Judd is trying to make that point either. But just like the unexpected demise of the Soviet Union in the end of the Cold War in 1991, we had a grand opportunity to reshape U.S. foreign policy vis-a-vis Africa. And we didn't do it effectively. And here we are once again. When we come out of this crisis, the world, in many respects, could be very different. One respect could be that a lot more people are doing telework, and an awful lot more things are being relied upon by distance and by telecommunications rather than physical presence. And it may cost many millions of jobs for people who work in businesses that previously relied on a physical presence. We shall see. But whatever the case is, Africa is not the Africa that many politicians continue to see. And Judd makes this point as well. He makes a point that I've mentioned many times, and that is that people look at Africa and they see 54 disconnected, separate economies. And my phrase, to use this, they see the C cube: chaos, corruption, and coup d'etat. C cube, the 3 C's. And that's what a lot of politicians see in Africa: chaos, corruption, and coup d'etat. In other words, not something they want to get involved in. And so the problem with that, as Judd correctly points out, that is no longer the Africa that we see today. Africa is not the hopeless continent. Africa is a growing continent. Africa has a land of opportunity, a land as in a land mass, not a land as in a country. But it is not 54 disjointed countries. Regional economic communities have degrees of economic and political integration. And beyond that, the continent today is increasingly urbanized. We see more and more people moving from rural areas into major urban centers like Lagos and Nairobi and Johannesburg and elsewhere around the continent. And so that today, Africa is becoming urbanized. And so it's not fully urbanized, but fully 40% of the continent's population now lives in urban centers. Now, this is a very different situation than what we've seen before. Another aspect of this is that Africans are increasingly connected, and Judd hits on this point as well. The rapid expansion of internet bandwidth across the continent, especially in certain countries, has made a major impact on economic development and interconnectedness of Africans. And so this is not the remote, rural, backward, desperately poor, disconnected, and chaos-prone Africa that many people have in their minds. And policymakers must change their view of that if we're to have advancement across the continent. So Judd comes up with 3 recommendations in his op-ed that he suggests. And the first is that he suggests that the U.S. revamp its programming in sub-Saharan Africa. In other words, he suggests that we change who it is with whom we engage, that more effort should be spent at local levels with local officials, municipal councilors, and things like that. That should be more of a focus, revamping our programs. I didn't necessarily see it in his article, but I suspect he's also suggesting that we revamp the nature of the programs and how we fund things in Africa. But that I would not disagree. The next point, he talks about redefining how we engage, redefining our engagement in Africa. And he specifically points out that it seems that overwhelmingly, when we work with security actors in Africa, our focus is on counterterrorism. Well, on this point, I would disagree with Judd. Having served in 8 embassies and been the security assistance officer in 7 different missions around the continent and an attaché, I would argue, over the past 20 years, I would argue that that is a misnomer. While all the attention is focused on our counterterrorism efforts in places like the Sahel and our funding of troops for the African Union mission in Somalia, AMISOM, our focus has not been overwhelmingly when it comes to security on counterterrorism. That is what gets the headlines in international press. What doesn't get the headlines in international press is the daily effort and engagement trying to work on professional military education, development, civil military relations, pandemic response, exercises for interoperability and familiarization, mill-to-mill contacts. For instance, when I was the security cooperation chief in Botswana, we had 63 individual events in a single year with the Botswana Defense Force on engaging them under a program called the mill-to-mill program. Nothing on counterterrorism when I was there. Now, by contrast, when I was located in Niger, we spent a lot of energy focused on counterterrorism, but not just that. Counter-trafficking was also part of what we're doing, professionalization, professional military education, things like that. So I would argue that that has not been the overwhelming focus, and that may just be a matter of different viewpoint, but I'm giving it to you from having been inside the wire and run these programs and arrange the programs. I would say that CT gets the attention because that's what's sexy for journalists. That's what sells television time. That's what people want to hear. That doesn't make it necessarily the focus or the case. So that was redefining our engagement so that we're not overly focused on something like that. I would agree we should not be overly focused on counterterrorism. It should be but one component of what we're doing in Africa. But I would refocus in a different fashion, and I would go more in line with his next point, and then a couple things I'll bring in from my article at the end here. So his next point is we should reinvigorate public diplomacy. Oh, hallelujah. I am on board, brother. Sign me up. Where do I get that pin? How do I get that ticket stamped? Public diplomacy in Africa. While we have brilliant public diplomacy officers at missions across the continent, our region-specific, our continental-wide public diplomacy is an abject failure. And it is very disappointing. And it frustrates me to no end. Just a decade ago, the term strategic communications fell into disfavor amongst policy wonks and amongst politicians in D.C. Why, I don't know. They looked at the term strategic communications as if it was some sort of evil undertaking. It is not. Strategic communications is the effort by a nation state to influence and inform those abroad. Simple as that. There's nothing wrong with that. It's not propaganda. You simply share accurate information and you're honest and transparent about things, and you highlight the things that you are doing with and for other people. This is something that we definitely need to do. Now, Judd takes an interesting approach. He says that the U.S. Department of State should be focusing more on engaging with athletes and celebrities, musicians, and prominent persons. And I would agree with that. I'll give you a perfect example of this. Akon. Why is Akon not involved with the Department of State in pushing development programs and efforts in West Africa? Akon's parents came from Senegal, I believe, and he has a strong affinity for Africa. And arguably, among celebrities, Akon has done more for Africa than any of the celebrities you've ever heard of. He is doing amazing things for Africa and has done amazing things. When I was in Liberia, he started to build his interest in coming back to the continent, and he came and did a concert in Liberia, and it was quite the event. We'll talk about that in another broadcast. But yes, athletes, stars, musicians, engage in that fashion. But I would also suggest that our public diplomacy needs to go beyond the simple, as Judd says, press release from the embassy. No, you have to engage the press. You have to engage civil society in the countries where you have diplomatic missions. I've done this across the continent in my tours, and this is a key to success for our public diplomacy. Jack Ma and the Chinese are eating our lunch. Are they doing great things in Africa? Well, Jack Ma has been generous. His philanthropy is helpful. Thank you, Jack Ma. But Jack Ma handing out 1 million masks in Uganda is helpful, but the $435 million the United States government gives to Uganda each and every year to support their healthcare sector means that they have a healthcare sector. Were it not for the generosity of the American taxpayer and U.S. foreign policy, there would be virtually no healthcare available anywhere in Uganda. None. There'd be no one to hand the mask to. Why are we not talking about that? Why do we not highlight that? This is a failure, in my view, of public diplomacy and strategic communications, something that needs to be focused on. So once again, let me recap what Judd Devermont came up with. So he's talking about revamping our programming in Africa. I'm with that. Redefining our engagement. I don't disagree with that, but I don't believe that the focus has been in one specific area has been overly on counterterrorism. And the third one is to reinvigorate public diplomacy. Amen, brother. I am on board with that. So that's the first two articles. The first one, as I mentioned, from John Rosenberg, and the second one from Judd Devermont. And so the third one, and not shameless self-promotion, but just trying to frame things here, again, is my article from the U.S. Army War Room, U.S. Army War College War Room, and it is the article, A Closer Look at the New U.S. Strategy for Africa. Now, I wrote this as shortly after former National Security Advisor, Ambassador John Bolton, had announced this publicly, and he talked about a new focus for U.S. foreign policy towards Africa. 3 different points. His first was that the first priority was advancing U.S. trade and the commercial ties. There you go. That's exactly what I'm for, and I'll talk about that in a second. His second point was countering the threat from radical Islamic terrorism and violent conflict. I understand that. I'm not so sure that should be our second priority. And the third one is ensuring U.S. taxpayer dollars are used effectively and efficiently. Well, I appreciate the focus, and I think I understood why he puts it there, because this administration thought there was a lot of waste and abuse. And across the specter of the scope of our entire federal budget, there certainly is plenty of waste and abuse, and probably some in Africa too. But by and large, I would argue that should be a given. You shouldn't have to identify that with policy. I understand why it was there. I would advance U.S. trade and commercial base, absolutely. Africa currently has approximately 1.3 billion people living on the continent. By the year 2050, that population, no matter what happens with population efforts, will be 2.3 to 2.6 billion Africans. That will represent most likely a consumer market on the order of 1.3 billion consumers. Those are people with disposable income after meeting their expenses. Shockingly large number of people, a large market. That is a consumer market nearly 4 times the present size of the entire United States population. Imagine this. And so shall we sit back here and watch as observers over the next 3 decades as Africa becomes wealthier and people have money to purchase things? And instead of purchasing American goods and services, they're looking elsewhere for insurance. Why is AIG not in Africa? Why is AFLAC not in Africa? We do see American companies, but we don't see the sort of companies that ought to be going to Africa and taking advantage of an opportunity to improve economic development for Africans and for our own economy and for the health and welfare of our society. In that discussion in December 2018, 18, Ambassador Bolton also talked about something called Prosper Africa. Well, where is Prosper Africa? There's a program, but almost nobody knows about it 18 months later. And this is a significant problem. So, ladies and gentlemen, there you have it. A little bit of discussion about U.S. foreign policy in Africa. Is the Wuhan coronavirus, or COVID-19 by its scientific name, a unique opportunity for the United States to reformulate and re-strategize its foreign policy with Africa and across the continent? Well, in fact, I would agree with Judd Devermont. I think it is a unique opportunity, and I would agree with John Rosenberg that the United States needs a wake-up call. Otherwise, we will find ourselves left behind in the 21st century. And our progeny will rue the day that policymakers and politicians were so short-sighted that they continue to ignore a continent on the rise. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, Africa is on the rise. And there you have it. That is a little bit of discussion about that topic. I thank you for tuning in to this broadcast. I hope you enjoy it. Once again, if you like the content, please feel free to subscribe. There's a subscribe button right down there. Just push that, smash that button right there, click on it, and you'll be subscribed to my channel. But be sure to push the bell to the right of that. That's a notification icon. If you click on that and select personalize, you will get updates each time I publish a video. So please feel free to subscribe. The only way for me to get my message out there is for folks to share this. Share it with your friends, share it with your foes. Share it all day long. I'm happy for that. Please feel free to comment. I welcome comments, positive and negative, and I do adjust my broadcasts, my videos, based on feedback I get from folks. Also, please, if you do like the video, give us a like. Everyone likes likes. Yeah, I know that's redundant, likes. But the reality is that likes drive video viewing because YouTube includes videos that get more likes in their search. So thank you very much for tuning in once again to Untitled Africa. This is Chris, and I'll have more videos coming up shortly talking about debt relief in particular. But this was U.S. foreign policy in Africa, an opportunity. Will it go by the wayside? Thank you for tuning in. We'll catch you next time here on Untitled Africa. Feel free to subscribe. Thanks a lot.